Saludos de este lado, Marielis Acevedo Irizarry, periodista de política del Diario y también la persona encargada de la cobertura sobre los temas de Puerto Rico y la diáspora en el Diario. Hi, this is Marielis Acevedo. I'm the political editor in El Diario, and I'm also the person in charge of the daily coverage of Puerto Rican issues in and outside the island. Thank you for listening. As you can listen, this interview is in English because my guest prefers that language. So if you prefer Spanish, you can read the subtitles right here, okay? So today, Claire Valdez, the Democratic nominee for New York 7th Congressional District, is here with me. This is the second time that we speak. This is the second interview. The first time was before the primary, but many things has happened since then, and I'm pretty sure that I'm not the only one who wants to know what she's doing right now. It was in her agenda in these days and for the next weeks and months. After the campaign that opposed her to Antonio Reynoso, the Brooklyn Borough president, and the councilwoman Julie won. We have to remember that in this race, the issues of Puerto Rico were very important, were very essential for all the candidates, specifically because the Boricua Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez has been in the seat for more than 30 decades, okay? So that was very important as part of the debate. And she endorsed Antonio Reynoso. The Mayor Mamdani endorsed Claire Valdez. So today, I have the winner here, Claire Valdez. Thank you, Valdez, for accepting this interview and for being available to answer the question that matters, not only for the Puerto Rican people, but for people from other communities. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Let's see, vamos a ver, Valdez. Valdez, you won 62.5% of the vote in more Hispanic precincts. According to both Hub, that was a 32-point margin over Reynoso. What do you think that made Puerto Rican voters and voters from other Hispanic origins vote for you, basically?
I think a lot of different things. You know, our campaign had a very aggressive ground game. We knocked on 330,000 doors all over the district. And I think our message really resonated with Latino communities, Puerto Rican communities, immigrant communities across the district. You know, we were fighting for abolishing ICE. We were fighting to tax the rich, to win union protections for every worker, to build and ensure affordable housing and really strong tenant protections. And these are things that working class New Yorkers desperately need right now. We're facing a deep affordability crisis. And I think speaking specifically about, you know, the question of anti-colonial values, I was remained a candidate that was very strongly opposing the genocide in Gaza and recognizing that we need deep international solidarity across colonial battles, you know, all over the world. And that extends obviously to Puerto Rico and the fight for self-determination and real freedom on the island, which remains a colony of the United States.
There's a big issue also around the electoral absenteeism because in these elections, it was 90% of electoral absenteeism. My question is, what is your analysis of that result? And if you think that the result would have been different if more people had voted?
For me, you know, maximum voter participation is always best. We want our democracy to be strong and thriving. You know, I come out of the labor movement. I really believe strongly in the requirement of you know, organized labor building our democracy back up. So that's a long-term project. But you're right. You know, voter turnout in New York City, especially for midterm years, is traditionally very low, and we have to fight against that. You know, I was really proud that so much of the coalition that helped elect Zoran Mamdani in 2025 came back out to vote in this primary as well. You know, that's a lot of young voters, first-time voters, tenant voters, who traditionally do not make up a large share of the electorate. But we have to keep building on that success. You know, obviously, 1 year of high turnout in the mayor's election, an election that has a lot of salience that's all over the city, drives people to come out. But we need that kind of participation every single year. So looking ahead, we want to absolutely do everything we can to increase voter turnout. I don't think that the outcome of the election would have been different if more people had turned out. But that doesn't mean, you know, obviously that does not deter me from desiring as many people as possible to participate in our democracy.
So what is the strategy to reach those voters, specifically the Hispanic, that don't vote? What is the plan there?
You know, I think we have to be running on issues that really speak to people's needs, and we have to demonstrate in government that we can win them. I think that the mayor has been very successful in the first 7 months. He's charting out a path to make our buses faster, to actually freeze the rent for 1 and 2 year leases in New York City for rent stabilized tenants, and to fight for universal childcare. And it has started on that process now. I think when working people see that their votes not only matter in electing somebody, but then that person can deliver for them. This is how we change the electorate, and this is how we change people's habits around participating in democracy. But there's also, so much more that we can do in terms of voter outreach, making sure that we're speaking to people in the languages they speak, that we are doing voter registration drives, and really capturing the kind of energy that people have in these political moments. When young people are turning out for the first time, we need them to keep turning out. It's really essential that really everyone can participate in the democracy that we have here.
What contact do you have right now with members of the Puerto Rican community after the electoral event? What do you talk with them about their participation on the elections and the result? Tell me a little bit more about that.
We're working on building those relationships now with my team to build contact with certainly sitting members of Congress, but we need to be working with members of the Puerto Rican diaspora here in New York City and people who are living on the island and experiencing austerity, water shortages, electricity outages, and so many other things. I'm planning a trip to the island later this year in partnership with the United Auto Workers, the union that I come out of, which also represents about 7,000 workers in the island in in public and private sector, to learn from them about the way that they're organizing for worker justice, fair wages in the island, and against La Junta and so many other forces that have been cracking down on worker rights. So I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. I've been in touch with Congresswoman Velázquez, who is very eager to help make sure that this transition is smooth, and that representation of this district remains really strong.
How many people from Puerto Rico are in your team right now, working with you, specifically in topics related to Puerto Rico, Hispanic community?
We're building those relationships right now, and I think as we start hiring people for the office, we will absolutely make sure that that this community in particular is represented. I think it has been obviously a huge part of Congresswoman Velázquez's portfolio for her entire life, even before she was in Congress. But really, it's every single Congress member's responsibility to be representing Puerto Rico, which again remains a colony of the United States. So that's representation we'll absolutely have in our office team. My campaign staff is very small right now for the general, but we will be building out a campaign. I'm sorry, an office team that reflects a lot of different communities within the district.
I'm curious, what have you learned from the Puerto Rican community in the process that you didn't know before you started your campaign?
I've been learning a lot about the conditions on the island. I think this has been something that I come to this work with an anti-colonial perspective just because of my personal background and my history of organizing. I'm Native American. My family's history has been shaped by, United States colonialism and expansion, expropriation. That has been really terrible to so many different communities and places around the world. And so, I come to this work with that perspective already, but learning about the particularities of Medicaid issues on the island, the fragility of the grid, the privatization of resources on the island, and this history of austerity that has placed immense pressure on the economy of the island and people's ability to live there for the long term. So I've learned a lot about just a lot of different things happening on the island. I look forward to learning more too. This is an issue that I'm really eager to dig into. Again, not just because there's a huge Puerto Rican diaspora here in this district. The legacy of this district is very much one that is built on a Puerto Rican community. The legacy of Nydia Velázquez is obviously very important here too. But again, I come to this with a decolonial organizing history and lens, and so making sure that Puerto Rico has real representation in Congress, while until it is no longer a colony, is really, really important.
It's gonna take time, but you have to start. What do you think? What do you think the impact of the Hispanic and Puerto Rican vote may be in the next election?
I think it's a really good question. What we saw in the 2024 election was that a lot of Hispanic and immigrant communities voted for Donald Trump, or didn't vote at all. And what I think is really important in the work that I'm really interested in digging into over the next couple of years is how do we set an agenda that brings working class people of all communities back to the Democratic Party so that we're putting forward a vision that actually supports working people? We're fighting for things like Medicare for all, abolishing ICE, ending forever wars, and taking all the money that we spend right now tearing our communities apart. There have been ICE raids all over the district, and we know that, and in Puerto Rico too,
Mhm.
that as ICE activities increase, we're seeing just real devastation and unbelievable violence because of this agency. It does not keep us safe. But if we're putting forward an agenda that actually says you recognize that this agency has failed, the billions of dollars we pour into it are not keeping us safe, and that money would be better spent building hospitals, funding public education systems, mass transit, funding a Green New Deal to fight climate change. I think we can win people back in a real way. And so that's the work I'm really interested in digging into is setting a bold agenda for the Democratic Party so that Hispanic voters come back. Because right
Well,
now,
sorry, for that well agenda, you need the support of many factions in the Democratic Party. At this time that we are talking, can you say that the Democratic Party as a whole is behind your candidacy or not?
the Democratic Party as a whole is a very big party, big tent party. But what we saw even from a few days ago with the Massey Amendment and a record number of Democrats voting to say we do not want to send more money to Israel in support of this genocide, I think it's a signal that there's a real sea change happening. And these ideas are gaining popularity, and certainly as more progressive Democrats win, not just in New York City, but around the country, we're showing that there's appetite from the Democratic electorate for this kind of politics. So I'm meeting with a lot of different people in the Democratic conference now. I'm building relationships as I've done in my work as a union member, and look forward to finding commonalities and fighting for what this district needs.
The campaign, some of your opponents portray you as a candidate with limited knowledge about the community. For example, the general attorney said that leaders like you don't understand the politics of New York, the difference from district to district. Do you think that you have overcome that characterization of some leaders of the Democratic Party?
I'm looking forward to meeting again with every member of the Democratic Conference because we have to build these relationships if we're going to get things done. I think what the election results showed, we won this district by more than 20 points and won almost every single demographic vote across the district too. Clearly, the message that this campaign had and the message that I had as a candidate resonated with voters, and they want to see. I'm going to Congress with a real mandate to fight for the things that I ran on, and I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure that we win.
You said that you have spoken with Nydia Velázquez. What have you spoken with her about? What? What topics specifically? The party, Puerto Rico? Can you specify?
Absolutely. So we've had a few conversations since the election. We spoke mostly about what a transition could look like. I look forward to having more conversations with her about that. I think for me, and I do believe for the Congresswoman too, the most important thing is that this district has the representation that it deserves. We are servicing a district that is still very working class, communities that have been left behind time and time again that need solid, good constituent services. And for me, having continuity there in the office is really essential. And the Congresswoman wants us to make sure that that happens and that I'm supported as I make this transition. So I expect I'll have many more conversations with her. I think especially around the work that she's done on the island. That work has to continue and continue to be built. So I look forward to having more conversations with her.
Did she say that she's gonna be by your side in that process of trying to get to Congress, once in Congress? In that sense, what did she say?
She really just expressed her support and her desire to make sure that, I won the seat. She wants to make sure that I'm successful, because the success of the person who represents this district is the success of the district itself and the people that we want to represent. So she wants to be helpful, and in the same way that she has encouraged and supported many young leaders in the Democratic Party over the years, I think she wants to offer the same support.
What about Antonio Reynoso? Any conversation between the two of us or not?
We spoke really briefly on election night. He offered his congratulations, and in the same way, we're going to be working together. He's still the Brooklyn Borough president, and um, the 35% of the electorate that voted for him, I want to make sure that they feel that they have a voice in me as well, and that I'm going to represent every single person in this district. So there's a lot that I have to learn from Antonio, and I look forward to working with him. I really do.
Presumably, this angle of the debate, how important is for you to work and collaborate with leaders like Velázquez, Reynoso, and others that are progressive or not socialists ahead of the election? And how important is that to come together to win more than New York, for example?
It's incredibly important. We don't win with a tiny group of people. We need to build really strong and lasting coalitions. And so, this is what I learned in my days as a union organizer too. The things that unite us against our enemies, bad bosses, billionaires, large corporations, the things that unite us together are so essential and so strong. And so, I am a very proud democratic socialist. That's the campaign I ran on, who I am. But there are many progressive partners, in particular in this district, who have had a long history of organizing here. And building with them and make sure that we're fighting alongside each other is going to be really important if we're going to do the things that I ran on: abolishing ICE, winning Medicare for all, building the labor movement, fighting for affordable housing, so much more.
You mentioned self-determination for Puerto Rico. My question would be, how far are you willing to go in Congress, right, to promote and impose a self-determination process?
I want to work really closely with leaders on the island and leaders within this community too, to make sure that we're putting forward a vision for a true and open and democratic process for real self-determination on the island. So that's the most important thing to me. I don't get to. Congress should not set the terms for what that um, self-determination should look like. We should make sure that it is focused on as open a democratic process as possible, so that the people on the island can determine their future. That's the thing that's been denied to Puerto Ricans for far, far, far too long. And so fighting to make sure that self-determination is on the table is important, but so is making sure that um, people can live on the island with dignity, that they have healthcare and power and drinkable water. There are also so many crises facing the island right now, that freedom is determined too by if you can live a dignified life. And so lots to fight for on that front. But want to work with people on the island to make sure that we're in partnership there.
But I guess you have an opinion, a position about the vehicle or the tool. Is it the status convention? Is it the plebiscite? I guess it's the status convention because that's the one, the bill that presented Velázquez and also Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Yeah, I'd be
Right.
supportive of reintroducing the Self-Determination Act that Congressman Velázquez put forward.
Why not a plebiscite, for example, and why not consider that option?
I think I would be curious, in, again, continuing the legacy that Congressman Velasquez had in this district, and really trust her leadership on this, but want to work with her and Congressman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, both have been leading on this issue for a long time, to make sure that we're really reflecting the desires of the people on the island. That really is the most important thing. Again, this is about self-determination for people who live there, and I want to support the most democratic form that can take.
I ask you this because some people argue, this is a debate also, that the status convention is not an inclusive option because a limited group of persons will define the options for self-determination for the referendum, right? So I want to know what is your point of view about that argument, for example.
I think, again, I want to make sure this is as democratic as possible. So that's the best way forward, in my opinion. That this is open, that as many people as possible can participate, because this is really, again, a decision and a process that's been denied to people who have been colonized for a long time. And what justice will look like is true and open democracy. So that's the path I want to chart. And again, I'm really looking forward to working with people on the island, leaders on the island, activists here in Brooklyn, to make sure that that's the process that we chart out.
What will you do to convince leaders leading to the new progressive party in Puerto Rico. Because the fact is that they are very vocal about this issue, and this topic in particular. They're against, most of them, against the status convention. So what are they need to do to convince them that that's a good option for Puerto Rico, right? But because most of them defend like a plebiscite for Puerto Rico.
I mean, I think again, I'm planning a trip to Puerto Rico later this year. I want to connect with as many people as possible, and make sure that I'm organizing together. This can't just be a top-down decision. So I think I'm really looking forward to working with folks on the ground here in Brooklyn to make sure that the process that we chart forward is, again, as open, as democratic as possible, involves as many people as possible, and that it is true self-determination and true freedom. I think that's what's required in this moment.
In your platform, you call for a Puerto Rico for his people. Puerto Rico para su gente, en español. What do you mean by that? I read the platform, but I want you to explain. And what will be your first step in that direction? When you say Puerto Rico para los puertorriqueños, what do you mean?
I mean that right now, so much of what is happening to Puerto Rico is dictated by an unelected board, is dictated by private corporations, is dictated by people who want to privatize the island. We need to make sure that Puerto Rico is for its people, and that means they have control over their resources, that they have ability to, afford groceries, that they are able to go to a doctor, that their land is not being used as a military base, as a platform for, forever war and incursions to, Cuba and Venezuela. That this island is really, belongs to the people who live there, and that they have control over their lives. I'm a person who has the experience of not having a seat at the table. I think many of us have had that experience in our lives. What I want to make sure is that working people, whether they live in Vieques or whether they live in Ridgewood, have power over their lives. And so that's what the platform spells out.
Valdez, in terms of La Junta, it seems that there's not a political will to amend or repeal the promesa under which La Junta was created. What would be your strategy to deal with that issue? Because it's not easy.
No, it is not easy, and I think it will, as you said earlier, it will take time. But I think right now I'm really focused on, the really crippling debt that the island is still facing. I think we have to cancel that debt. There are many, obviously, immediate disasters that are happening on the island: the water shortage, the inability of many Puerto Ricans to access healthcare. I think those are really front and center in my mind. And then as we tackle kind of the fragile energy grid, making sure that LUMA is held accountable, that we are also looking toward a longer term path toward true, again, self-determination on the island, and making sure that, there's real democracy there, and an unelected board making decisions about the future of the island is not, in my opinion, a path towards true democracy. So that's, a lot to tackle there. But I think we're going to start with the real material issues that are happening on the island. I certainly join the calls for real accountability and understanding of why LUMA has failed over and over again to provide a stable energy grid to the island. But in the same way that, in Ridgewood, Queens, where I'm calling you from, we have private energy companies that are almost entirely unaccountable to their customers, that make enormous profits off of our need for electricity to run my air conditioning during the heat wave. And what we need really, not just in New York City, but in Puerto Rico, is public power, is power that is run by and for the people, that will make it easier to transition to a green future, that will bring costs down for for ratepayers. And in the same way that we have to hold these private companies accountable here in New York City, same thing has to happen on the island.
But that Congress has also a fiscalization role regarding precisely that topic of funding for the electric grid and funding in general for construction. Recently, the U.S. Government Accountability Office released a report that confirms the limited progress in the use of federal funding for reconstruction. 75% of the money has not been disbursed, and never 9 years after Maria, basically. It's gonna be 9 years in September. What do you think is the main problem here with the fund allocation? Is it the requirements of FEMA? Is it the local government that's not doing their job? What is the big issue here?
I think I have yet to read the full report, but I did see that, 9 years after the hurricane, the vast majority of this funding that was promised that is legally required for Congress to pay still hasn't been paid out. And that's a disaster. We see that now in, not in this water crisis, in constant utility, and in electricity outages. And so I'm very eager to also find out where the problem is. If it is an inefficiency in FEMA, and certainly under this presidential administration, there have been many issues with FEMA payouts going to various parts of the country. But obviously, it's not only this administration that is the cause of this problem, given that it's 9 years since the hurricane. So I think we need to look at if it's bureaucratic issues, if there are problems, with if it's something that's wrong with the agency itself, if there are issues on the ground implementing these funds. It's hard for me to say now, but I think this is something that we have to prioritize in terms of figuring out why on earth 9 years after this disaster, $11 billion that were promised have still not been delivered to the island in a moment when there are obviously enormous crises facing the people there, that, certainly this kind of investment could help mitigate.
You mentioned lower costs for Puerto Ricans, but that could apply to everyone, right? You mentioned the repeal of the Jones Act, but there's a lot of resistance between Congress leaders in that direction. As a matter of fact, that's the main issue being discussed right now in Congress. So, what is your plan in terms of the Jones Act? Sorry.
I think we need to really, I think this is like every other issue. There will be disagreement in how we implement it and misunderstanding of why it is so essential that this act is addressed. But it's such an issue for the people who live there. It's something that we have to have on the table. We have to be questioning why fuel costs, food costs are so expensive on the island, and it's because this particular act has made it almost impossible to get affordable food and fuel. And so, I think, like everything else that we are going to be fighting for, we have to find kind of common allies in this fight. We have to do some education on why it's an issue, and try to lead with an eye toward this is an affordability crisis, and it's a deep affordability crisis on the island. It faces some of the most expensive utilities and fuel costs of any territory, and that's unacceptable. So I think it will be absolutely a priority in the same scope of kind of the affordability crisis that so many other people face here in New York City as well.
Well, you listen to Claire Valdez, a New York 7 congressional district nominee, Democratic Party. Thank you very much for accepting this interview. Thank you for answering all my questions. And definitely, we're going to keep in touch because it's necessary not only for the well-being of the Puerto Rican, but in general for the Hispanic and other communities. So thank you very much for your time, Valdez.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the conversation.